My husband runs a landfill down south, and there are plenty of stray dogs that live in the landfill and have for years. He says they are very friendly and they all seem to get along with each other. How is this possible? Is there something to learn from stray pack dogs that actually live without humans caring for them? I do believe the workers have on occasion provided food for them, but I don't know if that's a regular thing. I just really found this interesting.
Great question.
It is a great question.
What do you think, Josh?
Oh, that pack mentality, huh? I mean, I don't know. I don't want to like get it into the, where it's like the theory about, the wolves and the hierarchies and all that, but I feel like in the wild, that's just how it comes to like that's the natural progression of like pack dog type of animals, I think they just make their own hierarchy out in the wild. And I think when you have multiple dog households and they're trying to figure out their structure, I think it's the same thing in the wild. They're just trying to whoever's the alpha, and then they kind of follow the leader of the pack. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does.
That's what I think.
Listen, I don't think you're totally wrong. I think that there's been all this conversation over the years about like dominance and hierarchy and dominance theory and blah, blah,
that's
blah.
What it was.
People are like, people are like, oh, it's real. And then people are like, oh, it's fake. And then people are like, oh, it's real. And then others are like, oh, it's fake, right? And it just like constantly goes back and forth of like, oh, well, science disproved it this way. Science disproved it this way. And science disproved it this way. But here's the thing, right? We all can identify for a minute and say that as humans, right? A same species, right? Us as humans. It is very, very clear as you maneuver throughout life that there are different caliber of people, right? There are people that are way up here and are very assertive and take charge of situations. There are people that are very, very weak and submissive. There are people that sit somewhere in the middle. I think they refer to that as like the beta or whatever it may be, right?
A little Andrew Tateism there.
Yeah, right. But there's like, there's all sorts of different, like when you're having interactions with people, it is constantly this game of like superiority. You know what I mean?
It is.
Like everybody's kind of flexing on everybody a little bit, or other people are trying to really kind of stay, down in the seams and like keep the peace and not ruffle any feathers and stuff like that. And we just organically kind of figure a lot of that out. Right. Yeah. Now you have your anomalies of obviously people with, serious mental disorders and heightened aggression, if you will, and stuff like that don't quite fit into the mold. But for the most part, I think people do a very good job of self-regulating, figuring out that kind of harmony of that like hierarchy of where we sit with each other, and we can maneuver through that really, really well. Yeah. Right. But that's because we understand our kind. We can communicate very effectively with each other. Generally speaking, we all speak the same language, whether it's verbal language if we're all in the same kind of area, whether it's, body language and how we interact non-verbally with each other, which is very, very apparent, how you use your body language, right? How you non-verbally communicate, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's because we understand it, right? We're the same species, so I can understand when you do a certain thing, I can interpret it very, very clearly into what that might mean because I've done similar things myself, right? Now let's equate it to dogs for a minute, right? Dogs understand dog language, right? No different than we understand human language. Dogs understand dog language. So if you remove the human side of things, right, and you remove all the micromanaging and all of the restraints and all of the man-made things that exist in the real world to try to control dogs because of this misunderstanding of what we're actually seeing is, right? A lot of times, the majority of dogs are going to figure out where they sit with each other very, very nicely on their own, right? And, I think that, socially, let's look at like from a dog training standpoint, when we're running socials, right? The worst thing that you could do in socials and what generally creates the most problems is when we add in confusing man-made things, right? leashes, barriers, fences, micromanaging of behavior that's very, very normal. Like imagine like if you're trying to have a conversation, let's say we're trying to have a conversation right now, and every 3 seconds, somebody's trying to butt into the conversation to stop you from saying something because they think it's going to offend me, or try to get me to say something that's going to make you, whatever, less frustrated by something when we're just having a normal conversation. Now imagine how much tension that would create if we're trying to have a serious conversation with each other, both towards the individual that's doing that, as well as how much it would cloud the conversation that we're actually trying to have with each other. We would not be able to fully understand each other's points because somebody that doesn't understand our conversation is constantly butting into it, right? Now equate that to dogs. Everything dogs do, physically, the noises they make, the body posture that they do, stuff like that, it's a communication that they're having with each other that humans don't really understand. We can just interpret it based on repetition and pattern of seeing it in many different cases, right? And we, because we don't understand it, constantly try to micromanage it, which is what actually creates the problem, right? And because of that, dogs are never put in a position where they could ever get to the bottom of that conversation and create an understanding amongst each other because we're constantly stopping it from hitting that point. Yeah. Right? So I'm not saying that we need to like let dogs figure out all of their problems with each other forever and ever for the end of time, because obviously I think in some cases that can create problems. And I'm not saying that this pack of stray dogs has never had an issue with an outsider dog before, where there's been scuffles and that dog has been, you know, whatever, realized, hey, there's a sense of danger around this pack and I need to just go away and stay away from it. But even that, I think they understand more deeply, right? Like, you know, they could get into a squabble with each other, and dogs in the wild understand safety and danger, right? They could stay close to something that is safe and they may have an understanding with and a good relationship with those dogs. Or if it's clear this isn't going to work out, they could generally figure out how to just kind of avoid it on their own. Yeah. You know what I mean? Obviously in the human world, it makes it a little different because we can't let the dogs decide all of their decisions forever and ever for the end of time. Yeah. Right. We've got to add in some of the human element to things. We keep them in an enclosed area, our house, right? Yeah. We keep them in an enclosed area, our fence in our yard. Yep. We walk them on a tether, a leash, right? So they're existing in an unnatural world to begin with, where in the wild, it's much more natural. They don't get forced to stay in places that might be safe or unsafe, or go towards places that might be safe or unsafe, right? So all that to say, I think that this is normal. This is stuff we talk about all the time, which is the more we remove the micromanagement from the human standpoint, generally the less problems there actually are. Because if a dog was scared of somebody or scared of another dog out in the wild, they're just going to stay away from that thing. They're not going to create a problem with it. They're not just going to go and unprovoked attack this dog they're scared of and this pack of dogs all the way over here. They're going to stay away from it. And the more we can kind of remember that and keep that in mind as we navigate social situations with our dogs, I think the better off we're going to be. So yeah, I think there's a lot that could be learned from that for sure.
Yeah. Have you ever heard about like what pigs...
No, tell me about it.
So every pig is the same genus. Like it's the same thing. A domestic pig and a wild boar, same thing. And if you and this actually happened by my house when I was in high school. This guy, the city told me he couldn't have pigs in his backyard. I mean, there was a town. There's 2,000 people, all right? Sure. We were out in the middle of nowhere in southern Indiana. So he just let them loose. And
is this where, do they like turn into boar?
Yeah.
They'll like evolve into boar? Yeah. I think I've heard something about this.
Yeah. I think Joe Rogan said it a couple times about stuff, but it is true. And I've actually seen it where they were just domestic, the cute little pink pigs. And after like a month, they literally their snouts start to grow. They get the tusks and they start growing hair again.
Okay, this is a really interesting, way of framing this kind of. And obviously, I'm sure there's a little bit more science to that situation. I mean, that might not apply to dogs, obviously. Yeah. But let's look at it this way, right? Like the environment those pigs are in restrains them from becoming what they could ultimately become and learning the skills that they're going to need in order to adapt and survive in more situations.
Yeah.
Right? So let's look at it this way. Like, if we helicopter parent our dogs all the time and we don't let them learn lessons, meaning, you know, they go mess with the wrong dog and that dog scares the fuck out of them, and we don't jump in right away and we let them learn that lesson of, I should probably stay away from that dog over there, right? Or whatever, any number of situations that could possibly happen to your dog out in the wild, right? Or they go chase down the squirrel and finally catch the squirrel and get clawed up in the face, or any number of these types of things, right?
Yep.
We're constantly stopping our dogs from learning all of these lessons that are important for survival. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We're doing these things for them to keep them alive, where they don't understand, oh my God, like if I run in the street, I'm going to get hit by a fucking car. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's a reason why, generally speaking, you don't see stray dogs wandering around the highway all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that they probably are able to learn lessons on their own to keep themselves out of danger. Right? Which is why they're able to self-regulate and not see everything as this, like, I need to go run up to every person I see and every dog that I see, because they've probably experienced danger enough times where they have to be a little bit more cautious, right? But because we hold them back through the environment we put them in, they're never able to become that true self of theirs, and they're never able to become the best version of the dog that they can be, which is why, getting back to training methods, balanced training is so important, because we could teach safety and danger through consequences and rewards that we provide for them to help them ultimately understand how to self-regulate and live their best lives on their own, you know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, probably one of the best examples of... I don't know, those kind of like new age wild dogs, like being able to stay away from danger, would be like when the dog daddy was kind of talking about, like in Brazil, where these wild dogs kind of had their thing, and like that's how he kind of grew up with dogs, that they were just had their own thing, and he kind of worked with them out in the wild and stuff. You know?
There's ultimately going to be like a harsh reality to it of, like, if you go too far down that rabbit hole, like I'm sure there's many, many dogs that just die.
Yeah, they just
because
don't
they
make
can't get access to food, right? They can't get access to water. They do make certain mistakes that are, you know, life-threatening, right? You know, so obviously there is a degree of micromanagement that goes into play to keep your pet alive.
Yeah.
But you really need to play that risk to reward of, like, where do I let my dog kind of learn their own lessons a little bit and figure out some of this stuff on their own? And where do I provide the guidance, right?
Yeah.
Or at what point in the spectrum do I provide the guidance so that they could learn the lesson, but I could still make sure I keep them safe with things, whether it's socializing with other dogs, socializing with people, learning what things we want them to do or don't want them to do in their day-to-day, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, 100%. I mean, anytime you go somewhere that has street dogs, right, it is crazy to see how well behaved those street dogs are. I mean, there's a lot of places you can go to where there's hundreds of street dogs all over the city, and they all coexist just fine with each other. You know, they might have a little scrap here or there, but you know, for the most part, they're generally pretty good.
Yeah, and you see, like, they learn who they can trust and who they can't. You know, like maybe like Dog Daddy said, like they would come to him, but they would be like no one else in the town could get like close to him or whatever, you know? Yeah. And I think that's just that natural, like, figuring out, like you said. You
should, one thing that I think people should do when they have like a free minute is go on YouTube, and I don't even know what you would search. So I see these videos that pop up all the time of, like, I just saw one the other day and I was going to save it to talk about it, but I didn't. And it was like 3 chihuahuas or something like that, like in a house, right? And they were like engaging with these little like lick toys, like doing their thing, whatever. And one of them tried to go take it from the other one, right? And this was in like fucking Indonesia or some shit. You know what I mean? Like, okay. This was definitely not in America, right? Uh-huh. And the dog that had that toy fucking went off on this dog for trying to take it. And it was like this like 15-second long fucking scrap these two dogs had with each other. And there was no intervening or anything. Person's just sitting there fucking filming it. Yeah. You know? And, you know, figured it out, right? Scrapping. And then they just fucking stopped and they had their little stare down. And then one of them ultimately submitted to the other. Right. Yeah. And, you know, then they went right back to chewing their own toys and everything was fine. Right. And these dogs weren't like bleeding and all fucking fucked up and stuff like that. Right. They figured out this little scrap with each other and determined, hey, you're not going to steal that toy from me. Right. And the other dog learned the lesson from it. But under 99% of circumstances, if something even remotely similar to that happened in your household, what are you going to do? As soon as that scrap breaks out, you're going to be screaming and jumping in and grabbing dogs and breaking it up, which all that does, getting back to somebody intervening on a very, very important conversation, all that does is fuck with that moment, and it gets their attention onto you for a minute, but they never figured out their beef with each other. You know? So when you get into these issues with like multi-dog household fights and stuff, I think a lot of times when the issue gets really, really progressively bad, it's because we've extremed so far to any communication of boundaries amongst the dogs. We've intervened and said, you guys aren't allowed to do this, or we've confused it every time it happens, where without our constant guidance with things, if we miss something, those dogs don't know how to appropriately set boundaries with each other in a way the other is going to actually understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, like all of these things, there's this grain of salt you have to add to it of like, you can't just like let your dogs fight all the time. You know what I mean? Like that's like not okay either. No. But like as you work with more dogs, like as a trainer, you understand what fights you need to be concerned about and which ones you got to kind of let slide a little bit so that they could ultimately figure out those problems with each other.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But what I was getting at is those videos are very, very interesting to watch sometimes, because like that one, I think I was even watching it for a minute. I was like, damn, that's a pretty serious little scrap with these two little dogs. But ultimately, those dogs figured it out on their own without any human intervention.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But again, 99.9% of the population out there will never allow that interaction to actually happen because we're scared of it. We don't understand it.
Yeah.
Right?
Everyone should go watch Brandon Fouché.
Yeah, right? Go watch our episode we did on Brandon Fouché where he talks a lot about these types of concepts.
Yeah. That's all I can think about is like that's literally what he preaches to this day. So,
and again, you got to take it all with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Right? These are all things that just add it to your arsenal of understanding and just pay attention to it a little bit more. All those things, when you're socializing dogs, all those things you jump in for and stop and this and that, like really start asking yourself, are these things I actually need to stop?
Yeah.
Or are these normal things that dogs do when they're communicating with each other? And the more I micromanage it, the less they're going to deeply understand each other.
That's a good way to end that, I think, on that one.